Hello and welcome, my name is Dychronic, and today we're going to take a look at my top 10 PvE supers in Destiny 2 Lightfall. And of course, as always, I have made a spreadsheet for this video, which outlines the best damaging supers in the game in a bunch of different ways with a bunch of different exotics. And you can still find that at my Discord server, link in the description down below. And hopefully by the end of this video, you'll not only understand which supers are doing the most damage, which supers are really good for ad control, which supers are really good for support, but ultimately, which supers are actually worth using in certain DPS phases. And of course, these videos and these spreadsheets would definitely not be possible without the support of my patrons on Patreon. So if you want to see them continue, please consider checking it out. Because without your help, I may have to stop doing spreadsheets, and I may even have to stop doing YouTube. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. On screen right now, this is my spreadsheet. All the beautiful dark themed, color-coded pictures, exotics, different fragment orientations, and of course DPS testing, all the stuff that you could consider. And on the right side is my special little project, which answers a very specific question that I know every one of you have had. Is a certain super worth using for damage right before using your heavy, then using your special? We'll talk more about this part at the end of the video. Moving on, let's go ahead and get started. At number 10, we have Blade Fury, which is the Titan Strand super. And it's funny because originally everybody laughed at the Titans because the other two supers and subclasses looked better. And although technically their supers I do believe are better, Blade Fury comes in as one of the best supers in the game. With 1.3 million full super damage and 120,000 DPS, it rivals nearly every heavy in the game by a pretty considerable margin as a roaming super, which is supposed to be for killing ads. And if you didn't know, the heavy attack suspends targets and technically increases the damage of your light attacks on that target by around 25%. So anytime you engage with this super, make sure you hit enemies with the heavy attack and then go in for the light attacks. And you can make it even higher if you have Synthocept, which again, it's an ad killing super, so will actually be a big benefit. And furthermore, it's part of the Titan Strand, which in my opinion is probably the best Strand build these days with all the suspend and wolf and mail stuff. Following that at number 9, we have Arcstaff, both with starter scales and raid in flux. And in case you didn't know, starter scales increases the damage of any hunter super by around 70%, as long as you can get 4 orbs of power after your super is charged, which is pretty easy to do, on top of also increasing the amount of super you get from the orbs. Raid in Flux makes your super last a whole lot longer, up to 30 seconds as long as you're hitting the target consistently. And as a pro tip to output the most amount of damage with Arcstaff, the combination is light, heavy attack. Not many people know the combination actually matters. And the badge of honor that Arcstaff has is it's still the total damage king, although technically Silk Strike kind of slotted in between the two options. And with that, you're lasting a long time in your super, meaning you're resistant for a long time. You can dodge for even more resistance. You can reflect shots back at targets. The only downside is it's not ranged, and Arc is pretty weak on the hunter. Following that at number 8, we have the Glacial Quake, which is the Stasis Titan super. And in my opinion, one of my favorite, most fun supers in the game. And in case you don't know, the heavy attack creates 2 rows of 3 crystals, each crystal actually doing a considerable amount of damage. You can usually get around 7 to 8 heavy attacks depending on how you angle. And all of these crystals can be destroyed on top of a boss, shattering, freezing, and doing a ton of extra damage to large swaths of area, making it ideal for ad killing, shutting enemies down, stopping unstoppable targets because of the shatter thing, as well as single target damage, as long as you can get those crystals around that target. TLDR, incredibly high total super damage, great for ads, great for boss damage, and a lot of fun. And furthermore, it's on a good subclass. Stasis Titan is good. Following that at number 7, we have Needlestorm, which is the Strand Warlock super, and it is by far the highest damage and highest DPS super that Warlocks have. Second place is literally Nova Bomb at less than half of that damage. And if you didn't know, the Whiteout Fragment, which increases the damage of Threadlings, does improve the damage of the super, specifically the explosion and threadling part. And furthermore, again, it's part of Strand, which is pretty popular and has a lot of suspense stuff, which is really strong. Overall, outside of needing well for certain engagements, every other Warlock having Needlestorm is not a bad idea. And frankly, it looks super dope. Following that at number 6, probably the best Titan super in the game, Thundercrash Missile with Falling Star, which Falling Star doubles the damage of Missile on top of giving an overshield to be able to survive. And to be honest, there's not much more to say about this. It does a lot of damage, you smack your face into the enemy, you can have storm grenades or pulse grenades with this, and it's just an excellent option. In fact, it's the best Titan option that you can have. From here on out, it's pretty much all Hunter supers. Following that at number 5, we have Gathering Storm, a super that probably every one of you have forgotten about, but has the highest DPS in the game and very similar amount of full super damage as Blade Barrage with Knock 'em Down and Starter Scales. And if you don't know it, it's essentially the arc super alternative where you toss that pole at an enemy that can technically stick to bosses. And the reason why we don't see this more often is Blade Barrage is pretty much the same output and it's on a much worse subclass. Arc for the hunters are not very good, whereas Solar is pretty good. Following that at number 4, we have the Silk Strike, which is the new Strand Hunter super, which used to be broken. It was doing like hidden double damage and people were killing dungeon bosses and raid bosses super duper quick in less than one phase. And technically the visual damage numbers did get a little bit bigger since then, but obviously not nearly as broken as it was before. That being said, at 1.8 million full super damage, it is way above everything else as a roaming super that lasts a pretty long time that can also do great single target damage, great AoE damage on Strand, which again, pretty popular and has cool suspend stuff. And frankly, I just started playing my Hunter last night, and it's literally the I win the game super now. Up next at number 3, we have Blade Barrage, which used to be, in my opinion, the #1 super in the game back before the nerf that they gave it last season, I believe. The nerf was that it nerfed Knock 'em Down, where before Knock 'em Down changed the number of knives you throw from 14 to 24, now it's from 14 to 20, which is still a pretty big boost and pretty much the highest damage output super in the game. And furthermore, again, on Solar, which is a very popular and a very strong subclass for the hunters. And following that at number 2, we have the Mobius Tether with both Starter Scales and Orpheus Rig. Starter Scales having a higher upper bound in both ways, but is obviously requiring that of Orcs. Orpheus Rig is often just simpler. And many of you would probably think that Blade Barrage should actually be a higher rank than that of Tether, considering the fact that it does higher DPS and higher full super damage. And it used to be, back before the nerf, it was close to like 1,000,000 total ammo damage, which is why it was ahead of Tether. But nowadays, at 800,000, Blade Barrage is only 100,000 away from Tether Mobius. And if you pair that up with the fact that Mobius Tether obviously gives you a 30% debuff to the enemy, meaning you and your team can do a lot more damage, making it a good option for PvE raids. And technically the highest debuff that you can have, weakened grenades are only 15%, and it's also on Void, the strongest subclass for hunters, which has invisibility and volatile rounds and a bunch of other great stuff. So TLDR, Tether, even though it has less damage than that of Blade Barrage, is on a much better subclass with more benefits. And a bit of a PSA here, I highly recommend to many of you hunters out there, instead of using Blade Barrage, throw a Mobius Tether with Starter Scales. The damage is not that different, and that debuff goes hard for all of your teammates. And finally, at number 1, we have the Well of Radiance, a Warlock super. And if you've been on my channel for a while, I've constantly believed, and I somewhat still believe, that Warlocks are often in 4th place among the 3 classes. That's the running joke. However, I do believe they have the best super in the game, Well of Radiance, and I also believe they have the best build in the game, which is Starfire Protocol Solar Well Warlock. So firstly, Well of Radiance can be used in pretty much everything, giving your team a 25% damage buff to their weapons, giving them healing as well as resist stacks whenever they're in it, although unfortunately you don't get overshields anymore. The fact that it's, I think, the fastest tier of charging super, so you're going to be getting it quite frequently. And again, it's on Solar, which can be used with Starfire Protocol, and obviously with a Horde or Anarchy to get those fusion grenades like nuts. And again, Well of Radiance is pretty much demanded in every endgame activity. High-level raids, high-level Grandmaster Nightfalls, high-level seasonal content. Well of Radiance is near invincibility and higher DPS on an amazing subclass. And finally, I wanted to talk about this special little project on the right side, which answers the question of whether a super is worth using in a certain kind of DPS phase before using your heavy, before using your special. More specifically, it's Gjallarhorn and Cartesian Coordinate with Vorpal. And obviously this is not the best DPS combo weapon in the game, but there's a lot of combinations. This is just a good choice. And if you see a cell in green, that means that super is worth using in that length of phase on that type of play. Specifically, either 15 seconds like Atheon or 35 seconds like Roll. And of course, whether you're playing by yourself or team play does also matter. If you're playing solo, I assume you don't have a buff or a debuff on the enemy unless you're using things like Tether or Well. And if you're in a team, you have the 25% from Well of Radiance and you have the 30% from either a Tether or a Tractor Cannon. Keeping all of these numbers in mind and making sure the weapons get their bonuses to damage from the weapon bonuses and the debuffs, and the supers are getting their bonus damage from the enemy debuffs. And of course, again, a considerable amount of math with a lot of if statements all nested in together answers this question definitively. And I think I hope I've done this math correctly. TLDR, you start a DPS phase, you start by using your super for X time, you switch to your Gjallarhorn for Y time, and then you switch to your Cartesian coordinate with Vorpal for Z time. And depending on how long the phase is, you may end up not getting to the Cartesian coordinate, or maybe even not even Gjallarhorn. But that's what all this math is for, so that it all fits within the right type of phase with the right bonuses. And even though it does definitively answer that question of if it's worth using, technically most people will just use what they've always used. The Hunters will use Blade Barrage and Tether with starter scales. The Warlocks will probably use Needle Storm or Well, and the Titans will use Falling Star Thunder Crash. And you can see all of those technically are in green. So I answered a question that you've all probably wanted to know, but none of you are going to make any different decisions because of it. I'm not regretting my life's decision at all. I think that this math is beautiful. It's terrifying, but beautiful. And of course, a big thank you to my patrons on Patreon. Specifically, a big thank you to Mom, Dad, Caper Shaw, Waffle Iron, Robert Strayer, James Osler, Monday, Stu Bachman, Sunu Panther, Case Reagan, William Peterson, and Argus for the support on Patreon. And that's it. Hope you guys did enjoy. My name's Dychronic, and I'll see you guys on the next one.